An elderly man arrived at Union Station in Washington, wearing his best suit and carrying a letter from a widow. He was turned away at the gate as if he did not matter. Then a 4-star general saw him and stopped the entire funeral. The train hissed to a stop at Union Station in Washington, D.C. Elias Whitaker rose slowly from his seat, carefully straightening the cuffs of his white shirt beneath his brown wool blazer. His trousers were freshly pressed, though a bit loose at the waist, and his shoes shone with careful attention. It showed he had taken his time that morning, not because anyone would notice, but because it mattered to him. A woman across the aisle, perhaps in her 30s, smiled as he lifted his worn leather suitcase. "Visiting family, sir?" she asked kindly. "No, ma'am," Elias answered with a small smile. "A friend. A funeral." "I'm sorry," she said softly. He nodded once, adjusted his brown felt hat, and walked toward the exit. No further explanation felt necessary. Not today. Stepping onto the platform, the morning air met his face, carrying the faint scent of diesel, coffee, and something sweet from a nearby vendor's cart. Elias took it in quietly. The city was loud and alive, but he had not come for the city. He moved with a stiff yet steady gait, the kind earned from decades of walking hard floors. Years spent pushing a mop at a high school in Birmingham, never missing a day except the week his wife passed. Now he was alone. No children. No brothers. Only memories. He reached the taxi line. A young man in a navy hoodie cut ahead of him. Elias said nothing and simply waited his turn. When his cab arrived, he gave the driver the Atgumby address for Arlington National Cemetery. The driver glanced at him in the mirror. "Big service today, huh? Should be packed with a 4-star general there." Elias nodded. He was a good man. The driver asked nothing more. He drove with the radio low and the windows cracked just enough for fresh air. Elias sat in silence, watching the city give way to monuments, trees, and flags. His thoughts drifted back to Montgomery Road in Tuskegee, where he and Tom Ellison had first met as boys, one the preacher's son, the other from the mill houses. They became inseparable, playing stickball in the street, fighting over nothing, sharing cold watermelon on summer days. They went to war together. Only one returned with medals. Elias had never cared about that. What mattered was the bond that it held for a lifetime. The taxi stopped near the south gate of the cemetery. Elias paid and stepped out slowly. Cars lined the street. Men in uniform stood at quiet attention. Ahead, he saw a long black hearse and rows of white chairs arranged beneath a green canopy. He was almost there. Elias paused to straighten his collar and reached into his blazer. He drew out an envelope addressed in neat, careful handwriting. "Mr. Elias Whitaker, please join us at the front. Sincerely, Rebecca Ellison." He looked at it for a moment, then slipped it back inside his coat. With a steady but heavy heart, he walked toward the main entrance, alone and unnoticed, carrying decades of silent history. No one there yet understood. As soon as he stepped off the curb, trouble appeared. A young officer, no older than 25, stood at the gate in a crisp dress uniform, another equally polished officer beside him. Both scanned arriving guests with professional detachment. Elias offered a polite greeting and reached for the envelope. "Good morning, gentlemen. I'm here for General Ellison's service. His wife said I should show you this." The shorter officer took the envelope, squinted at the handwriting, and looked at Elias. A polite but strained smile crossed his face. "Sir, your name is not on the official list." Elias shook his head. "They told me this would be enough. I served with the general." The taller officer leaned in to read the note, then straightened. "We have to verify names against the master list. Those are the family liaison's orders." Elias remained calm, though a certain weight entered his voice. I've come a long way. I only want to pay my respects." That man meant the world to me. The younger officer shifted uncomfortably. "I understand, sir, but without authorization we cannot let you through. This is a high-level event. It isn't personal." Elias looked past them toward the rows of seats filling quickly. The ceremony had not yet begun, but people moved with purpose. Brass buttons, flags, solemn faces. He could hear a trumpet being tuned. He removed his hat and held it to his chest. "I'm not here to cause trouble. That man over there," he pointed toward the hearse. "I pulled him out of a rice paddy with a hole in his chest. I'm not trying to take anyone's place." They did not yield. "I'm sorry, sir," the taller one repeated. "We have our orders." Elias stepped back, his hand steady, though his eyes dropped to the pavement. A couple behind him whispered as they passed. They glanced at him, then continued on. One older man in a gray suit offered a small, awkward nod, but kept walking. Elias moved aside and leaned against the stone wall beside the gate. His knees ached from the long journey. The sun had risen higher, and sweat beaded on his forehead. He wiped it with a handkerchief from his coat, then drew out a folded photograph, soft at the creases. Two young men covered in mud smiled in combat uniforms, one with an arm around the other's shoulder, laughing as if the world were not burning around them. Tom had his arm around Elias. Elias looked at the photo, then returned it to his coat. Minutes passed. The officers continued checking names and waving people through. A woman in black walked by, leaving a faint trace of perfume and powder. A small child followed, holding her mother's hand, shoes shining. Elias stood like a statue, still hopeful, yet growing dimmer with each passing moment. Every few seconds, his eyes returned to the green canopy, where the flag-draped casket now rested. A young soldier passed with a clipboard. Elias called to him softly. "Young man." The soldier stopped. "Yes, sir." "I'm trying to get in. I served with the general." The soldier hesitated. "Do you have credentials?" Elias showed him the envelope. The soldier read it and offered a half smile. "Let me check with the list coordinator." He disappeared inside the gate. More minutes passed. No one returned. Elias shifted his weight from one foot to the other, still waiting, still unseen. But he was not the kind of man to raise his voice until he saw the ceremony begin without him. In Quang Tri Province, South Vietnam, the jungle had been loud that day. Branches snapped, distant shouts echoed, and the low stutter of gunfire bounced through the trees. Mud had soaked into everything, even the bones. Elias had crouched behind a stump, rifle tight in his hands, eyes searching the smoke ahead. His chest rose and fell quickly. Sweat ran into his eyes, but he did not blink. The platoon had been ambushed during what should have been a simple reconnaissance. It had turned to chaos. Tom had shouted over the gunfire, "You got eyes on the ridge?" Tom Ellison, then only a lieutenant, crouched beside him, bleeding from the shoulder, helmet gone, dirt streaking his jaw. "Negative. We're surrounded. Radio's dead." Elias cursed under his breath and looked back. Two more soldiers lay face down, unmoving. He did not dare check if they were breathing. A burst of AK fire erupted ahead, and Tom jerked as a round grazed his thigh. He went down hard. Elias did not hesitate. He grabbed Tom by the collar and dragged him behind a fallen tree. "Stay with me, you hear?" Elias said, breathless but focused. "You're not giving up today." Tom grimaced, trying to stay upright. "Go on without me. I'll slow you down." Elias ignored him. He reached into Tom's vest, pulled a smoke grenade, and yanked the pin with practiced ease. He threw it toward the tree line, where the enemy fire was heaviest. Purple smoke bloomed in the air, covering them for precious seconds. It was all they needed. Elias lifted Tom onto his shoulder and ran low and fast, legs burning, heart hammering against his ribs. He did not stop until they reached a shallow ditch, half hidden by tangled brush. He lowered Tom carefully, hands slick with blood. Some his, some not. Tom coughed, eyes open. "You're crazy, Whitaker. You're lucky I'm here." Elias checked the wound. Rifle fire began to fade as the rest of the unit pushed through the ridge. The ambush had been broken. Reinforcements arrived soon after. Elias stayed beside Tom the entire ride back to base, keeping pressure on the wound, talking to distract him, even making him laugh when breathing was difficult. After that day, Tom privately called Elias my shadow, though never in public. Back in Alabama, they rarely spoke of the war, not because they did not want to, but because people only saw one of them in uniform. Only one appeared in the papers. Still, whenever Tom visited home, he made sure to stop by Elias's porch, sometimes with a bottle, sometimes just to sit in silence and listen to the cicadas. The story of that day in Quang Tri stayed between them. Tom once tried to recommend Elias for a medal, but Elias had laughed. "I didn't carry you for a medal," he said. "I did it because I wasn't going to let your loud mouth die in that swamp." Tom had simply smiled, but in the present, the only battle Elias faced was his, for a seat at his friend's funeral. He stood apart now, one hand on the stone wall, the other holding the envelope he had already shown 3 times, the same envelope that had earned him only polite refusals and empty promises. The sun beat down on the back of his neck without mercy. He loosened his tie slightly and shifted to ease the ache in his right hip. He watched more guests arrive, men and women in black, officers with polished medals, quiet children holding someone's hand. All of them had badges, passes, names that matched the list. None looked at him. A black SUV pulled up to the front. 3 high-ranking officers stepped out, exchanged firm handshakes with the liaison near the entrance, and were quickly ushered inside. Elias looked toward the canopy. A chaplain had taken his place, and the crowd beneath the tent began to settle. Elias tried once more. He returned to the gate and touched the shoulder of one of the young officers. "Sir," he said, more urgency in his voice now. "I came because General Ellison asked me to. That envelope isn't just paper, it's from his wife. We've known each other since we were boys." The officer, visibly uncomfortable, nodded stiffly. "I'm sorry, Mr. Whitaker. We have strict protocol today. I can't make that decision." Elias swallowed. "The family liaison, Rebecca, is inside the perimeter. You can't bring her out right now?" The officer looked away. The answer was not simply no. It was that no one was going to lift a finger to try. Elias watched a cluster of white chairs near the front fill. People stepped aside to make way for a man in dark green uniform who seemed important. Everyone seemed important today. He was not angry. Not yet. But a sharp burn rose in his chest. Not from pride. It was something heavier. He drew the envelope out again and opened it slowly. Inside was a short, handwritten note on cream paper. "Elias, if you decide to come, please show this to any member of the staff. Tom would want you seated with us. Always. Rebecca." He folded it carefully and returned it to his pocket. He could have sat on the curb or turned around, but that was not how he had been raised. That was not how his mother had taught him to carry himself. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, carefully folded piece of faded fabric. It was an improvised armband from Vietnam, green and worn, with Tom's initials sewn by hand with fishing line. Tom had made it for him after they left Quang Tri. "Wear it," Tom had said. "That way, even if I don't make it, a part of me stays with you." Elias had kept it for decades. He stood straighter, squared his shoulders, and slipped the armband onto his left wrist. His hand trembled slightly as he adjusted it. Still, no one noticed. Or if they did, they said nothing. An officer checked his watch. Another waved a late-arriving family member inside. Elias remained invisible, standing in plain sight. He heard the opening prayer begin. He heard the low murmur of the eulogy through the speakers. He shifted his stance and dropped his gaze to the ground, trying to hold the rising anger in that quiet place where he always kept it. But sometimes it only takes one person noticing. From the far end of the field, just beyond the rows of seats and standing guests, a tall figure in full uniform began walking toward the south gate. His stride was deliberate, not hurried, but direct, like a man who knew exactly where he was going and why. The ribbons on his chest caught the light, and the 4 silver stars on each shoulder needed no introduction. General Harlan Voss was known in military circles as a man who did not waste words or time. He inspired respect because he gave it. Upward, sideways, and downward, where true loyalty lives. He stopped near a staff sergeant in the central aisle and leaned in. "Who is that man outside the gate?" he asked. Not loudly, but clearly. The sergeant looked surprised. "Sir, that man." General Voss pointed toward the wall where Elias stood, still as ever, his blazer now lightly dusted by the wind. "Why is he standing out there while the service is happening?" The sergeant stammered. "We don't have authorization for him, General. Security." Voss raised a hand, not in anger, only with authority. "Continue with the ceremony." The chaplain's voice faded mid-sentence as Voss turned and walked straight down the path, passing between rows of confused guests, generals, colonels, officers, and civilians. His boot struck the pavement with a rhythm that cut through the soft murmurs rising from the crowd. At the gate, the 2 young officers saw him coming and straightened instantly. "General Voss, sir," one began. He ignored them and continued until he reached Elias, stopping just in front of him. He looked at him. Really looked. Not at the suit or the weathered skin or the tired eyes. He saw something more. "Sir," Voss said, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "what is your name?" Elias took half a step forward. "Elias Whitaker." Voss nodded once. "You knew General Ellison." Elias's voice cracked, but he steadied it. "Since we were 9 years old. I also served with him. In Vietnam." Voss was silent for a moment. Then he raised his right hand, firm and proud, and gave Elias a full military salute. Not quick or perfunctory, but genuine. Elias blinked. Voss lowered his hand and spoke again. "Mr. Whitaker, would you allow me the honor of escorting you to your seat?" Elias opened his mouth but found no words. He simply nodded. Voss offered his arm, and they walked together, shoulder to shoulder, along the paved path toward the funeral. The murmuring crowd fell into absolute silence. Every head turned, every eye followed. The young officers at the gate said nothing. One stepped aside so quickly he nearly dropped his clipboard. As they had approached the front row, Tom's widow, Rebecca, stood with tears in her eyes. She took Elias's hand. "I told you he would come," she whispered, voice trembling. He squeezed her fingers gently. General Voss turned to the chaplain and nodded quietly. "Please, continue." Then he took his seat, still watching Elias like a man who understood he had just witnessed something larger than protocol. When they walked together toward the family, the entire crowd fell silent. Elias sat slowly in the empty seat beside Rebecca, adjusting his blazer and sitting straighter, not from formality, but from respect. That seat had been reserved for him, not by protocol or the organizers, but by someone who knew what mattered more than rules. Rebecca did not speak right away. She simply rested her hand gently over his. It stayed there a long minute as the chaplain resumed the service. Her grip was light but steady, like a memory. "You didn't leave him," she said. Elias looked ahead. The flag-draped casket rested beneath the canopy, surrounded by wreaths and a photograph of General Thomas Ellison from his final tour. Gray hair, steady eyes, the same stubborn chin. Elias did not recognize half the people in the front row, but it did not matter. None of them had pulled Tom from a ditch in Vietnam, with bullets whistling overhead. None of them had sat with him in a barracks tent, passing a bottle and talking about home. The chaplain spoke of duty, legacy, and honor, but Elias barely heard. His mind traveled to a cold morning in Alabama, years after the war, when Tom had appeared on his porch with a toolbox. "What's that for?" Elias had asked. Tom had shrugged. "Heard your water heater's acting up." Elias had smiled. "You a general or a plumber today?" "I'm your damn plumber," Tom had answered, kneeling and getting to work as if it were nothing. That was the real man. Not the medals or the salutes, but the friendship that lasted decades and never needed cameras to have meaning. A slight movement pulled Elias from his thoughts. One of Tom's sons, Nathaniel, leaned over from 2 seats away. He looked to be in his middle years, broad-shouldered like his father, with the same steady voice. "Mr. Whitaker," he said softly, "I just want to thank you. Dad talked about you a lot. He said you were the reason he always made it home." Elias offered a small smile. "We kept each other alive, one way or another." Nathaniel nodded, eyes moist. "I'm glad you're here." Elias looked forward again, eyes on the casket. "So am I." As the service continued, some in the crowd began to whisper. They did not know who the elderly man was, but they had seen a 4-star general escort him. They had seen the widow receive him as family, and when Tom's son leaned over to speak with him, they understood he was not just anyone. Behind the crowd, someone quietly took a photograph. Not to intrude, but because they knew something rare had just happened. It would spread later. The story would appear in headlines and retellings. But for Elias, none of that mattered. This was his goodbye. His place was not merely in the front row of a funeral, but at the center of a story that had never needed to be told before. The chaplain stepped back. A Marine folded the flag into a perfect triangle and presented it to Rebecca. She did not look at the officer. She looked at Elias, and with trembling hands, she passed it to him. Elias tried to protest, but she shook her head. "Tom wanted you to have it." He accepted it with care, reverently, and held it against his chest like something sacred. But Elias had not yet said goodbye. Not truly. After the final prayer, when the chairs began to empty and murmured conversations replaced the chaplain's voice, Elias remained seated. The flag rested in his lap, both hands holding it, as if it might fly away if he let go. Rebecca leaned in and whispered, "He wrote something for you a few days before he passed." She drew a sealed envelope from her purse. No stamp, no address, only Elias's name, written in Tom's unmistakable handwriting. Elias took it gently, eyes tracing the curves of each letter as if they might disappear if he blinked too long. He waited until the crowd had dispersed, until the rifle salute had echoed across the hills, and the last note of the trumpet had hung in the air long enough to feel like a breath held too long. Only then did he open the letter. The paper was thick, folded in thirds, slightly smudged where the pen had pressed hard. Elias unfolded it carefully, fingers trembling lightly at the edges. "Elias, if you're reading this, I've gone where you can't follow me yet. At least not for a while. I tried writing this several times and always started over. How do you write to the only man who knew you before the uniform and still stayed when the medals stopped meaning anything? I think about that day in Quang Tri more than I care to admit. Not because I almost died, but because that was when I understood something. You don't need rank to save a man's life. You don't need a title to be his brother. You only need to care more about someone else than you do about yourself. You've done that your whole life. For your community, for your students, for me. I never told you, but when I was Promoted to brigadier general, they offered me the chance to choose someone to pin on my star at the ceremony. I almost chose the general who had mentored me, but I thought of you standing in the rain that night in Vietnam, laughing while bullets whistled past our heads, and I knew no one deserved it more. I just didn't have the courage to do it publicly. I'm sorry for that. If I have one regret, it's not having spoken your name louder. You were the bravest man I ever knew. I hope Rebecca finds a way to get you seated in the front row, and I hope when you sit there, you remember this. I don't care who's watching or who thinks they know what matters. You always mattered to me. Your brother, Tom. Elias folded the letter again, more slowly this time, holding it with both hands, resting it atop the flag in his lap. Around him, people spoke in low voices, heading toward their cars, making plans for later. But Elias stayed still, reading the final lines again in his mind, not to understand them better, but to keep his oldest friend's voice from fading too soon. He had never been a man of many tears. He had not cried when his father passed, nor even when his wife slipped away quietly in her sleep. But now, a warm line traced down his cheek. He wiped it with the back of his hand. Slow, discreet. No drama. Only truth. There was one moment more that no one expected. Just as the last guests began to scatter, and cemetery staff collected the folding chairs, Elias rose. He tucked the letter carefully into his inside pocket, slid the folded flag beneath his arm, and walked toward the casket. Military personnel still lingered near the canopy. General Voss remained seated in the second row, legs crossed, watching Elias in silence. He did not move or blink much. He simply followed the elderly man with a gaze that seemed more promise than simple observation. Elias reached the edge of the platform where the casket rested. Sunlight touched the flag covering it, colors vivid and rich against the muted grays and greens around them. Elias placed his hand on the wooden edge for a moment, closed his eyes, and breathed deeply. Then he turned slowly. "I know I shouldn't speak," he said, voice steady, but loud enough for those still nearby to hear. "But I need to say something, not for the general, not even for his family. For me." He took a step forward, the flag still beneath his arm, his hat now in his hand. "I knew Tom Ellison before any of you called him sir, before the medals, before the politics, before the speeches. To me, he was just Tom, the boy who stole my lunch twice and returned it both times because he felt bad about it." A few people smiled. "I carried him once when he was bleeding and cursing me the whole way. And he carried me too. Not literally, maybe, but in ways that matter." Elias looked at General Voss, who gave a slight nod. "They told me I didn't belong here, that I wasn't on any list, that maybe I was just some old man. You know what I am? I was also Tom's brother." He paused. "I'm proud of you." "Proud of that." Elias turned back to the casket, raised his hand slowly, and rendered a salute. It was not a perfect salute. His elbow trembled slightly. His fingers did not align perfectly. But it was full of memory. Mud, sweat, tears, and years. Then a voice behind him cut the air like a bell. "Detail. Attention." General Voss had risen. He faced the casket and raised his own hand in a firm, flawless salute. Present arms. Nearly 24 uniformed service members, some seated, others already walking away, came to attention and raised their hands in unison. Officers, lieutenants, even a young cadet barely out of school. Not because protocol demanded it, but because the general had ordered it. And more than that, because they had seen a man worth honoring. Elias stood there, stunned, caught between pride and the weight of it all. For the first time that day, he did not feel like someone trying to prove he belonged. He knew he did. For a long, quiet moment, the air held in reverence. Then, General Voss lowered his hand. The salute ended, and one by one, the others followed. Voss stepped forward slowly. "There will be no applause, no ceremony," he said. He extended his hand. "Mr. Whitaker, thank you for your service to this country and to General Ellison." Elias took the hand, and they shook once, firmly. "He honored me long before this," Elias said, "and long after the uniforms came off." Elias remained while the last cars pulled away and the canopy came down. He stayed beside the grave. The cemetery team worked in respectful silence nearby, waiting but not rushing him. The day had quieted. The ceremony was over, but Elias was not finished. He sat on the low stone edge nearby, the folded flag still in his hands, held close. His knees protested the weight of the day, but he ignored them. Slowly he leaned forward and looked at the casket one last time before the earth would take it. He cleared his throat, not for anyone else, only to steady himself. "I told myself I wouldn't talk much," he murmured, "but I guess that ship has sailed." His voice was soft, more like thinking aloud than speaking. He was no longer talking to a general, only to Tom. "Remember that summer when you broke your arm trying to climb the water tower behind Jackson's farm? I told you not to. I told you the ladder was rusted. You never listened." Elias let out a quiet laugh, then fell silent again. "I still remember the look on your mama's face when she saw us coming down the road. Me dragging you by the waist and you howling like a madman. She didn't even ask what happened, just handed me a cold rag and pointed to the porch." He paused, looking out across the rows of white headstones standing at attention over the hill. "I never said it right before, probably because I didn't know how. But I loved you like my own blood, Tom. You weren't just a friend. You were my family." His voice broke slightly. "I always thought we'd die together someday, side by side. Old and slow, arguing over whose knees were worse or who forgot to bring the fishing poles." He reached into his coat pocket again and drew out a thin chain. Dog tags Tom had given him in 1970, just before another deployment. Elias had kept them ever since. He ran his thumb over the cold metal, then knelt carefully and laid them gently on the surface of the casket. "I figured it was time they came back where they belong." He straightened with effort and looked at the ground beneath his feet. "I'll carry what's left of us, Tom, like always. But I want you to know that everything you believed about me, you paid it back in full. Every time you showed up, every time you called, every time you let me sit on that porch and just be seen." He blinked slowly. "I'll be all right. I'll keep walking, but I won't forget. I can't." Then he did something he had not done in decades. Elias lifted both hands, clasped them in front of him, and closed his eyes. "Lord, thank you for letting me know this man. Thank you for letting us grow old, even if not together. And thank you for letting him rest today with someone who remembered who he really was." He opened his eyes. A light wind stirred the leaves overhead. Nearby, a bird sang once, then flew. Elias looked at the casket one last time. Then he turned, slow but sure, and began the long walk back along the paved path. Step by steady step, he passed the empty chairs, past the now silent hill, each footfall firm and settled. Sometime later, back in Birmingham, Elias knelt on a neighbor's front porch. Her screen door stuck at the top, and he had told her more than once he would fix it. That morning, he arrived with a screwdriver, wood putty, and a small folding stool that creaked whenever he shifted his weight. "Mr. Elias, you sure you want to do that in this heat?" the woman asked from the doorway, holding a glass of lemonade and offering it to him. "I'm already here," he answered without looking up. "No sense waiting for it to get worse." He took the lemonade anyway, had a sip, then returned to work. That was how he had always done things, even now. The funeral felt distant, as if it had happened in another life, until the woman's son came running down the steps, holding a phone. "Mr. Elias, it's on the internet." Elias blinked. "What is?" The boy turned the phone. There it was. A grainy video of General Voss crossing the cemetery, stopping at the gate, saluting Elias. Then the funeral crowd, the silence, the moment of stillness. It had spread widely online, with bold headlines. 4-star General Halt's entire funeral for an unknown man. But Elias was not unknown. He watched for a few seconds, then handed the phone back. That's something." The boy looked confused. "You're not excited?" Elias smiled. "That wasn't for cameras, son. That was just one man doing right by another." Back at his own house, letters and photographs from the funeral still lay on the kitchen table. The flag was folded carefully inside a glass display case a cousin had brought. People had called, local reporters, veterans groups, even a podcast producer from California who said the moment deserved to be told. Elias told them all the same thing. "I already said what needed saying." But one morning, he sat at the dining table with a pen and an envelope. He wrote a brief letter. "General Voss, thank you for stopping, for looking me in the eye, for not needing proof. I didn't expect what you did, but I won't forget it. You saw me, and you saw Tom in me. That's enough." Elias Whitaker. He mailed it the next day with no return address. Life continued. Elias fixed a broken window screen for the widower across the street. He volunteered once a week at the high school library, simply organizing books, and sometimes dozing in a reading chair when no one was looking. People still approached him at the grocery store. "You're the man from the funeral," they would say. Elias would nod, shake their hand, maybe offer a word or two. He never told the whole story. Not because he didn't want to, but because he knew some things only live fully between two people, and one of them was already gone. Still, there was one moment that stayed with him some time after the funeral. While walking through a small park, he noticed a young man in uniform sitting alone on a bench. He looked nervous, restless, perhaps before a deployment, perhaps for another reason. Elias sat beside him without a word, resting his hands on his cane. After a minute, the young man glanced over. "Are you the guy from Arlington?" Elias did not answer. He only smiled a little. The soldier nodded. "My grandfather showed me the video, said that's how men used to act." Elias exhaled slowly and looked toward the trees. "We just tried not to forget each other." The soldier nodded again. They sat in silence a while longer before Elias rose to leave. As he walked away, the young man stood and rendered a salute. No audience, no cameras, just one person to another. Elias tipped his hat in return, because in the end, it had never been about recognition. Not for him, not for Tom. It had been about showing up, keeping promises, being seen when it mattered, and perhaps, just perhaps, reminding some people how honor still works. If this story moved you, share it with someone who deserves to be remembered. And if you have an Elias in your life, someone who has walked beside you in silence, let him know today that he is valued.